it's a bit of there's a kind of cliche that goes around. You've probably heard it many times. People talk about, the musician's musician, the footballer's footballer, the kind of person that sort of everybody who plays or does whatever wants to be that person. Well, we have in the next hour privilege to have in the documentary session the filmmaker. Brian Woods runs True Vision is when those of us who kind of try to make documentaries measure ourselves, we often end up measuring ourselves against Brian. His first film, over 20 years ago now, amazingly. He doesn't look that old, does he? Yeah. The Dying Rooms was probably a film for which the word harrowing was invented, but powerful, powerful film. And Brian has gone on, I guess, if you'll forgive me, what Brian does in his films, and actually makes a wide range. We're going to try and give a sense, I think, hopefully, of the range of films that True Vision does over the next hour. You'll get a sense of the different kind of approaches and styles. But I think one of the things that kind of underpins all of True Vision's work is that it takes on the really big subjects, the really important subjects, whether that's poverty or human rights or inequality. But it does it in a way that takes you directly into the heart. It doesn't deal with it on an abstract kind of level. It takes you right into the heart of the kind of human stories that are the heart of it, and we'll see a bit of that. True Vision's mission statement on their website is that they're films that make a difference. So we're going to talk to Brian initially, and then we're going to, about halfway through there, we're going to Katie. We're going to be joined by Katie Rice, who has worked with Brian at True Vision, kind of on and off, at least for kind of almost a decade, not far short. And in fact, we're going to look at a couple of Katie's films in the second half. And I'm hoping, Katie is example of someone who started at True Vision and kind of worked her way up, and is, I hope, will be a kind of inspiration for a lot of you, that just to see what you can do. But anyway, let's get started. We've got a lot to get through. Give us a bit. So how did you get into this business? Was it something you always wanted to do?
I got into it by after I graduated, I got a job in advertising. Worked in advertising for a year, got fired. And kind of woke up on the Monday morning having been fired and thought, I don't have to go back to GGT. Gold Greenleaf's Trot was the advertising agency. I don't have to go to GGT on tomorrow. Oh, thank God for that. And I hadn't realised how, it was my first job, that's what I thought work was like, which was working with really not very nice people and not really enjoying it much. And then I thought, okay, I've tried that. I need to do something that might be a bit nicer. And the one bit of advertising that seemed to be a bit interesting was the people making the ads. But I knew I didn't want to do that because that would have meant working with advertising people who had kind of gone off a bit. So I just started writing letters, and I wrote to everybody who I could find, and eventually got a job as a researcher.
How many letters did you write? Can you remember?
I probably wrote about 150, but this was in the day. This was before word process. God, I'm so old. It was. I literally had an electric typewriter, not a manual, but I had an electric typewriter. I wrote one letter with a blank for the address, and I took it to the post office and I photocopied it 150 times, and then I brought back the photocopies and typed in the name, and then signed them and put them in an envelope and put them in those big red cylindrical things that you used to have on street corners, and it disappeared with a stamp on it. And some people wrote back to me and said, come and see me. And one guy, I remember there's a guy called Alan Shallcross from the BBC, who's probably long dead now, who was about my age at that time, when I was your age. And he said, come and see me. He said, I've worked for the BBC all my life, and I've made it a point to see people like you trying to get into the business. And over the years, I've seen lots of people trying to get into the business, and very few of them succeed. And what I can tell you is that the ones who do succeed have one thing in common, and it's nothing to do with talent or connections or intelligence or qualifications or charm or any of those things. It's sheer bloody-minded perseverance. And if you want to succeed in this business, then that is the most important quality you have to develop. And that was fantastic advice then to me at 20, 23 or whatever it was. But I think it's good advice now. You know, I mean, still, I'm sure we'll both, you know, we both now run companies and have been pretty successful. But still, you know, there are ideas that you just bang and bang and bang on the doors.
So we could stop the session now, really, because that's the only really important bit of advice, isn't it? Sheer bloody perseverance, you know. And you can all yeah. Anyway, we save a lot of time. But no, let's not do that, because we've got some rather wonderful films to look at. Let's start with a. So just before we show the first clip, maybe you could say. So this is Orphans of Nkandla, if I've pronounced it right. And this is Nkandla is in South Africa. And this is a film really looking about the devastating effect of AIDS. You know, do you, just briefly before we watch the clip, do you want to just briefly set it up? You know, how did you come to? So this is an early-ish. I mean, this is what, 15 years ago maybe?
Yeah. So the way this came about was that I made a previous film called Dying for Drugs, which was about the pharmaceutical industry and was about awful things the pharmaceutical industry were doing, testing drugs in Africa and massively overcharging for drugs in Central America and this kind of thing. And in the course of making that film, I went to Barcelona to an AIDS conference there, just kind of as part of the research. And I saw a film by a brilliant American filmmaker called Rory Kennedy called Pandemic, which was about the HIV/AIDS pandemic. And in that film, she told 12 stories of people who were struggling with HIV/AIDS around the world. And one of those stories was set in, I think it was in Gabon, and it was a little boy who'd lost his parents. And it was a short, you know, it's a very short story. I came out of that thinking, you know, it was a good compendium film, but like most compendium films, it's sort of, you don't have the opportunity to go into the depth. And I thought, God, if it had been me, I think I would have really wanted to just really dig down and find one place and just focus on AIDS orphans in that one place. And then I thought, oh, I should probably pitch that to someone. So I did. I pitched it to the BBC. And in fact, no, I pitched it to Channel 4. And they ummed and ahed for ages and then said no.
Doesn't sound like
Then
that.
I took it to the BBC. And BBC 4 commissioned it. It was one of the first films that BBC 4 commissioned.
Okay. Shall we watch? Let's watch the clip.
With Olsen in hospital, Mbali and Sneh are alone. The children have to walk over a quarter of a mile to the nearest stream for their water.
Mom. Mom. Ngihambe ngayabona babesibhedlela izolo. Ebe ukhulume no-anti kodwa akazange akwazi ukukhuluma ngoba bengakakwazi. Angazi shangazi ngizwe lapho kubuhlungu khona. Njengoba egula nje inhliziyo yami iba buhlungu ngena ngoba umama usashiya futhi ngabe uyobhekana inhliziyo iba buhlungu khona. But awuphanga nani bhodeni. Uzolidla kanje lelo phutha ngoba ngitshelile ndasamsefuleni.
With so many children in the area struggling to manage with sick or dying parents, there is no longer a safety net to help children like Mbali and Sneh.
Ngisaba ukuthi ngase kufike abantu noma abantu bafike bashaye noma benze ini ngathi.
many families have already taken in AIDS orphans, so while Alison is still alive, the children will remain alone.
I mean, I look at that and I think in many ways that's a sort of, I sort of see that as a kind of quintessential kind of true vision film. It's a film which is taking on a big subject, but, seeing it. And, but I suppose, I mean, but also a lot, because you are looking to try and personalise those things that sometimes seem a big, that's a lot of where the power of your films comes from. But there's also a thing there, I mean, it also takes you into situations where you are living with people and being with people who are on the very edge of life itself, really, and sometimes one senses on the kind of. Can you just talk a little bit about, I mean, in relation to that film, but maybe even also more generally about how you deal with that as a filmmaker? I mean, because some of your films, I don't mean this, some of your films are quite hard to watch, in the best sense of the phrase. And I know you know that, and that's partly why you do it. But could you just, I mean, give us a sense of how you, sort of almost how you deal. I mean, not just. I don't mean technically, more emotionally. How do you deal with being in a situation like that? And
I think that, I mean, emotionally, there are so many answers to that. So on the one hand, you're there in order to capture the reality, and the temptation is to intervene, but on the other hand, if you intervene, then you change the reality. And so what we often do is we'll record the reality and then intervene afterwards. And that might be a short-term intervention, or it might be a much longer-term intervention later. I mean, what happened with this particular film was that we set up a foundation after, which is still going. It's morphed into another form now. And that helped to code directly to Encandler and directly to those kids. And you never know what's going to happen with a film. So this was actually a BBC 4 film. It went out and 125,000 people watched it when it was shown on BBC 4. It was then repeated on BBC 2. And to everyone's surprise, over 1 million people watched it. And in amongst the audience was Elton John and David Furnish. They then wanted the Elton John AIDS Foundation to get involved. And also Richard Curtis and Emma Freud watched it. And they then wanted to take that on as part of Make Poverty History. As a result of that clip was then shown at the end of the Vicar of Dibley New Year special, which got a lot of criticism, and Richard Curtis got a lot of complaints. But it meant that over 10 million people saw that clip. And so over 10 million people were made aware of the reality of AIDS in Africa. And this is quite a long time ago when it was really raging, when it was a massive problem. And so the impact of the film, you hope it'll have an impact. And through Make Poverty History, tens of millions of pounds then got channeled into that issue in Southern Africa for orphan and vulnerable kids. So you're hoping that that's the outcome, but at the same time, you're dealing with 2 children who are desperately upset and distressed, and you can't take them home. That scene, it's painful to watch that scene, and I kind of, every time I watch it, I'm almost in my head hearing the audience going, "For God's sake, put the camera down and go and give them a hug," which obviously we did eventually. But equally, you can't, you have to let the reality play out, because the point is that if you don't let things happen and get them in the can, then you don't have the film that then has the power to affect things, not just for these children, but for hundreds of thousands of children across Africa.
But when you're making the film, of course, you're hoping.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're hoping.
Every time you set off on a journey like that, you hope that you.
Yeah.
Just on that building the relationship. I mean, do you? I mean, arriving in a village like this, and sort of, I mean, could you talk a little bit about the kind of just the process? I mean, do you spend time there? Do you kind of arrive and just unpack the camera and start shooting? Or, I mean, how long do you have to spend to kind of, I mean, are you
So that film,
trust?
so we made that film over about 9 months. So when we arrived, so my late wife, Deborah, went to South Africa on the first recce, and she met up with a wonderful South African producer called Koliswa Sithole, who obviously spoke Zulu, because we didn't speak Zulu and the kids didn't speak Zulu. Sorry, the kids didn't speak English. So we had to find the right person to work with, who had the right energy and felt right, and who had the right approach, and who could build that relationship. And when we are with, so fast forwarding a bit, Elton John brought Mbali and Sneh over for the White Tiara about a year and a half later, and they stayed at our house. And Debs and I had a very strong relationship with Mbali and Sneh, but it was always, by then Mbali was speaking a bit of English, which was lovely, but it was always primarily mediated by Koliswa, because Koliswa was the person who spoke their language, and so we were completely dependent on Koliswa. You only get to the darkness through the light, in a way. In all these situations, when you're looking for people in the most desperate and awful situation, you're normally going through some sort of gatekeeper, somebody who's there helping. So in this case, it was a woman called Sister Hedwig, who was a nun in the local Catholic church in Nkandla, who was the main AIDS worker, the main outreach worker for the hospital. And Debs met Hedwig and went, this woman's extraordinary, she's amazing. And then she said, oh, well, just come with me. And we were with her when she visited the local chief. And he said, oh, I think there's a family down in the valley in the next valley across, where the husband's, the wife's died, and there's enormous shame around HIV/AIDS, and no one names it. So you don't say they're sick again and that kind of thing. So his wife's died and he's sick again, and so we went and visited them, and we introduced ourselves with Hedwig and explained what we were doing and why we were filming, and Olsen, who was very ill, said, "Okay, yeah, you can film my children." And then we followed them, and 3 months later, Olsen was taken into hospital. A month later, Olsen died, and then the kids were on their own, and then we were there for the funeral, for Olsen's funeral, and then they were taken in by Olsen's brother, and we followed all their journey through losing their father, and they'd already lost their mother. Okay,
we could talk about any one of these films for an entire hour, so we're going to have to be about. There's lots of things I want to ask. But anyway, can I just say that we're going to keep some time for Q&A at the end. But if anyone is burning to ask a question about one of the specific clips, we can take questions as we go through and sort of and try and turn it into a kind of dialogue if possible. Has anyone got anything they want to ask right now? We've got a question down here. Can you wait? I think you ought to know this by now, but if you can wait for the mic, and can you stand up so we can see who you are? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anna.
Hello.
Hello. In terms of a film like that, because I'm doing documentary as well, I always wonder, where does the responsibility end? When you leave a project like this, like in terms of subjects, in terms of content responsibility, how do you approach that? How do you deal with it?
So I last saw Mbali about 3 years ago. She's now working as a social worker. Sneh is still at school. He's about 18 now, and we went back after the film was done. After the film finished, we went back a couple of times. One to do a follow-up film because BBC4 wanted to sort of see because it had such a big impact. They wanted to see how things had developed with family, and because Elton and David got involved and so on, and Mbali and Sneh came over. So it's harder when your subjects are in a foreign country. But I think that there's no hard and fast answer to how long your responsibility. It's kind of up to you and your conscience. I think everybody who comes to work at True Vision, I mean, Katie can answer this when she comes up. I know she's still in contact with some of the subjects of her films. We kind of only employ people who are not going to treat this just as a job. It's more of a vocation than a job in the sense that you have to be someone who cares about people, and therefore you are forming a relationship with these people, and it's not friendship. You're making a film about them, and and that can be difficult because sometimes they can feel you're a friend and you're not actually a friend. You've got a job to do, but you're friendly, but there has to be a professional boundary. But on the other hand, of course, you want to keep in touch with them, you want to keep supporting them, and you want to help them if you can, without that becoming the focus of your life. So in the case of Mbali and Sneh, we stayed in touch with them for years afterwards.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on actually because we have got a lot to get through, but we will, as I say, we'll try and take, we'll have time for more questions. Okay, we're going to go to the second clip, which is from Catching a Killer, more recent, and also I think it's fair to say, a very different side of what True Vision does. So we'll show the clip and then we'll talk about it. Just to set this up, so Catching a Killer is a kind of real-life cop show, really. I mean, it's basically the classic cop show format. A murder happens, there's an investigation, it's a whodunit, but the only difference is it's not, it's real. This is not a script, although sometimes it feels like it in the best possible sense. So this is an episode of Catching a Killer where a particularly brutal murder that the police are investigating. And it turns out, as the investigation unfolds, that one of the key witnesses is the teenage son of one of the prime suspects, the prime suspect, I think it's fair to say, which is a host. So I think we're going to see a bit where the son comes in to be interviewed by the police. Can we show a second clip, please?
I mean, we need to obviously get this right. It is a really important interview. He's a 14-year-old boy who absolutely idolises his dad, like most 14-year-old lads would, and he's telling us all he knows, the truth, and he doesn't know the implications of that, yet we kind of do know. Yeah, it's quite sad, really. He's not a child, he's a young adult, but he knows what's going on, and that's going to affect his life.
The reason we're here today, Brian, is to do a VRI, okay, visually recorded interview.
It's not common for children or very young people to be counted as a witness. In an ideal world, I wouldn't want to put that 14-year-old lad in a position where he's got to give evidence against his dad, and I'd want his dad to be manly enough about it to say, I don't want to put my son through that, because it's going to have a lasting effect on the son. It matters not what's gone before. This whole episode will have a lasting effect on him.
Take your time. There's no rush today, okay? Just take your time. And the more you tell me, the more I'll understand what's happened. Okay. All right?
We've got some fairly good circumstantial evidence, but we really need to search Danaher's house in Peterborough. We've got a whole raft of people up there trying to help us out, and time pressures on searching for them.
We're looking for a very early edition of The Wind in the Willows. It's probably a first edition.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Can you tell me about that conversation that you'd had with your dad on the 6th of April?
Okay, he rang me at 7:11, like you said, to say how bad of a day he had. And he said it was a bit better now that he's talking to me, which was nice. Right, he went to Southend. Yeah. 2 people, half his age, about 20, pulled out a knife on him.
Yeah.
He then just said, I fought him off, managed to deck one of them.
That's now recorded, Michael. We've told you that on the 6th of April, your vehicle is in the Oxford area. Now, do you understand that information that we've given you? All right? Okay.
So he told you about the attack?
He did.
Yeah.
He said obviously there was a knife hanging out of his cheek. He then managed to get it out and fend off the others. He said something about like he snapped he took the blade out of the handle. That's why he got like all cuts down his fingers from like the blade.
Right.
Well, you've got some like injuries here. Can you just explain what they are?
I don't know, just wear and tear, I don't know. I cut myself, all the time, so I don't know.
How do you manage to do that?
I'm just clumsy, I guess, I don't know. I can't say how they've happened, so they're just, they are what they are.
And did you notice anything in the flat that was different on Thursday?
Except from the products that he bought in like.
Tell me about those products.
So he had this Nikon camera,
Mm-hmm.
a bunch of numbers, it's about 150 he said he saw. So he said he wasn't really going to sell that one, he's just going to keep it for a hobby if he ever gets a chance to.
Yeah.
And he got this really expensive old Wind in the Willows book.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
And he looked at it, it was about £3,000, so he tried to sell it for 2.
Yeah.
Don't know if that's been sold or not, I'm not aware.
Okay.
And that's what he got, yeah.
Alright.
We found it.
You beauty, really.
Yep.
You star. Awesome.
Hey, right.
Great. Kev, Sandy.
Hi Andy, how you doing?
There is £49,000 worth of a first edition number 6 Wind in the Willows sitting in the living room. That's literally an initial scene assessment, and I'm going to leave the scene to them now for the forensics. Clearly that information needs to come back for the interview teams more than anything else.
Top man. Cheers, Andy. See you in a bit. Bye-bye. Bye. Right, the Wind in the Willows book that we know is missing from Adrian's house. It's exactly the same book at the suspect's house.
Have that shower in the morning, yeah, it'll make you feel better.
Thank you.
That'll be the next interview. We'll put it straight to him. The net's closing in on him because he's going to be put in a position where he's going to have to say he was there.
Quite hard to talk about this film without spoiling the end, but, so I think we probably better out there and say that the dad did it or went down for the crime. But
yeah, one of the things about that scene is that the whole film at that point has been focusing around this missing Wind in the Willows book. Yeah. So when the son says, "Oh, and he had this book," and the son knows nothing, and the son is just being honest and open with the police. When the son says, "Oh, he had this book, this old Wind in the Willows," that is like for all the cops who are watching it, that is like "Oh my God, we've got him."
And it's strange. The father, he concocts this entire story about being getting into a fight in Southend and kind of like fighting these guys up, and then sort of separately he tells, which is a kind of cover story for what's actually happened. But then he tells his son about the Wind in the Willows book anyway, and he doesn't attempt. I mean, the police eventually find not only the Wind in the Willows book but also the murder weapon in his house, and he's not the most competent.
Well, one of the fascinating things about this case was the fact that they had fingerprints and they had DNA at the scene, but didn't match any database they had. And the Stu, who's the deputy SIO at that point, I remember him saying on the second day of the murder, when they got back this DNA, this mixed profile, and said, "We've got DNA, but it doesn't match anything." He said either this guy's a contract killer who's been very careless, or he's someone who's never offended before, which is just bizarre because people don't go straight to murder. It's so rare. But that's what Michael Danaher had done. Michael Danaher's, it's in a way, it's a film about mental health because Michael Danaher's life just over a period of about a year just fell apart and several things happened to him, and he psychologically fell apart. And unfortunately, Adrian Greenwood was the victim of that because he decided that the way to solve this was to get money from people, and Adrian was not someone who was going to be a victim easily. And Adrian, clearly something happened in that house, and Adrian put up a fight, and Danaher ended up killing him. And there's like a whole sadness to the film because of that, because this man isn't some cynical, hardened career criminal. He's a kind of, he's committed this terrible crime, but it's like the first really, but. So again, I don't get bogged down in process, but, I remember studying journalism, and we, the law of contempt of court, we weren't even allowed to, when I started out as a journalist, we weren't even allowed to mention the name of anyone if there was an arrest imminent. So can you
talk a little bit about, first of all, the deal, how it works with Thames Valley Police, but also, I guess, a number of things. I mean, how do you navigate your way through those kind of legal? Because there are real legal minefields in making a film like this, aren't there? So, I mean, the beauty of this was that this came about because we actually we were making another film. We were making a film for the BBC called Behind Closed Doors, which was about domestic violence. And we had really good access with Thames Valley Police Domestic Abuse Investigation Unit. And Thames Valley Major Crime knew we were doing this and said, well, while you're making this film, if we have a domestic murder, you should include that, because that's that's ultimately where domestic violence ends up. And we went, great, if we can, that's fantastic. I went to the BBC and told the BBC, they're saying they can give us, and the BBC went, no, I'm not sure we want a domestic murder. No, I mean, we've got another series about, not really interested. And I went, okay, right, fine. And then there was a murder. The murder actually happened during Sheffield Documentary Festival. Oh, helpfully. And most of us were in Sheffield. Fortunately, a couple of people were able to get down and cover this murder and essentially demonstrate the extraordinary access that Thames Valley were giving us. I then took that to Channel 4, and Channel 4 not only commissioned a film, which was what I was pitching, but commissioned 4 films. They wanted 4 feature-length docs that they would commission together to give us the ability to wait for the right murder to happen, and then follow it through. And then obviously follow it through all the way to post-trial, because nothing could be broadcast. So in terms of the issues you're talking about, we can't show anything until a trial has happened. Or in the case of one of the films, the 4th film that we made, in the end, the police couldn't charge anyone. They knew who'd done it, but they couldn't charge anyone. So that was going to be my next question, was that, what you have here is a kind of like almost, I mean, you couldn't have scripted this better, really. I mean, you have kind of, as you said at the beginning, you have a perfect start, which is the police like, this is mysterious, there's no obvious, it looks like a robbery gone wrong, but the brutality is, there's lots of things which are weird about it. And as you say, there's DNA, but it doesn't match anything on the police database, which is kind of weird for them. They don't quite understand it, how come, normally this would be somebody with a criminal record or whatever. But then suddenly, for a whole variety of reasons, in quite a short time frame, I mean, you kind of count down the days in the film, don't you? I mean, it's a relatively short period that goes from kind of we don't know anything to to pretty much securing the conviction, or at least charging him. But I mean, I'm guessing that actually not that many murder investigations are quite that. So we started making this 2.5 years ago, and in that time we've now made 4 films. Right. We have a 5th that we've got to the point of charge, but we are. It was one of those things which, I mean, this is a sort of slightly businessy thing, but from one point of view, we were delighted when we were commissioned to make 4 feature-length docs. It's like, oh, fantastic, brilliant, really good bit of business for the company. We didn't quite realise how hard that was going to be, because you are then waiting for the most awful thing to happen. You're waiting for some poor soul to lose their life, and for the call to come from the police to say, come and film it, and for it then to be interesting in some way, for it then to be different to the ones you've done before, but to develop in some interesting way. And the first 3 we did, they were all, someone was charged within a week or so. The 4th, no one was charged, and we were making the film for over a year. And still having to do that. The 5th one, they were charged last week, and we have been filming that for 18 months. So it turned out to be very, very complicated, and a blessing and a curse in terms of how to make the films, because of all the complex issues and the false starts we've had. We were in January the 3rd, I was in Oxford filming a poor lad who got stabbed to death on a towpath in the middle of Oxford, and it turned out it was a county lines murder. The problem with county lines murders is that he'd come in from Birmingham, someone else had come in from somewhere else,
and the police were never able to actually work out who it was who'd come in from somewhere else into Oxford and ended up killing him over in some sort of turf war.
Do you never wake up in the morning and think, why didn't I just kind of do something like easy, like do a format like Super Nanny or something where I can just do the same thing? I mean, like, why am I drawn to these really difficult, complicated, expensive films?
Yeah, I do. I absolutely do. I kind of wish that. I mean, I think what True Vision is really, really good at is making great films. I think we're really bad at coming up with clever ideas for making films. So we end up coming up with not very good ideas that we then make into fantastic films.
Which is the right way around. OK, I'm going to invite up Katie to join us now. As I said earlier, Katie actually watched, I think I'm right in saying this, Katie watched as a producer on Catching a...
She was, yeah, she's a shooting producer on Catching a Killer. Yeah.
And we were talking earlier, actually, Katie joined, I think, back in 2010. Then, as is often the case, I think, with production companies, you tried to escape at one point and go back to being freelance, but didn't quite manage it and ended up back at True Vision.
I did. So at uni, I did lots of work experience, emailed loads of companies. I then found out places that you could temp in the media industry. At the time, there was a place called Judy Fisher where you could temp, and I temped with the BBC. When I left uni, I was like, right, I need to get a job. Emailed True Vision. It was on my list, and they were looking for, at the right time, a researcher for Poor Kids for BBC One. So kind of hit the ground running, was sink or swim, was given a camera, taught myself, went out by myself, was amazing. And then they asked me to stay, which was incredible. So I stayed for 4 years.
Were you writing, was it like, were you doing the same thing as Brian? Were you writing, was True Vision just one of the 150 letters and you got lucky with them? Or did you know True, you wrote wall to wall? Well, you lucked out there then, that's all I can say. But did you know anything about, did you know about True Vision before you wrote to them? Had you kind of seen the films?
Yes,
So you knew what they were doing?
I'd watched China Stole Children, I'd watched obviously the films, and then I came in and, had a chat with Jez. I mean, of course, they were the films that I wanted to make, and I wanted to make human interest films because that's what I'm interested in people, and films that would, without sounding cliche, make a difference and possibly kind of change people's lives.
I think Katie's slightly underselling herself in the sense that it wasn't just that she wrote in and we gave her a job. You know, we get dozens of people every day writing into us. She wrote a really well thought out approach to Jezza, who had directed China Stolen Children. She first of all managed to find his email address. She then wrote to him a very targeted letter talking about the films he'd done that made him notice it and think about it. She then persisted over a period of months in sort of gently, persistently contacting him again and again. Sheer bloody-minded perseverance, really. And then got a job as a runner for a week or two, didn't you, initially? And then it just managed to keep going and find a way in.
Let's try and... I mean, I'm going to spend the rest of the afternoon feeling really annoyed now that we didn't get you at wall to wall and you ended up getting you instead. But anyway, be that as it may, you win some, you lose some. I'd like to come back. I'd quite like to come back to that maybe if we have time at the end, because I have quite strong views, and I suspect you about how you that process of getting about how you writing. I think writing letters. How you get in. So we might, because I think you're a bit of an inspiration, I suspect, for a lot. But I think we want to. We've got two of your films now, and the first one we're going to look at is called Child of Mine. I have to say, I thought I'd sort of now turned into a sort of hard-bitten, cynical old television producer, and that things didn't get to me anymore. But actually, I watched this film and blubbed half a dozen times in the course of it. Can we show the clip of Child of Mine?
Kezia and Chris are also in UCLH for another scan.
We are going in for scan number, I'm not quite sure which number, lost count now. Twin 2. Growth is basically just plateaus.
Well, it needs to be at least 500 grams to be viable, and 2 weeks ago it was 260 grams.
Obviously we're still hoping that there might be a positive outcome, but we're aware of the reality of the situation as well. So obviously that does play on your mind.
Yeah, it's trying to balance hope with what they've said realistically. And I don't think you can. I think it's quite, like the last 9 weeks have been quite long.
And I think it does, to a certain degree, feel like your kind of life is on hold a bit, not knowing whether you're going to have, one child or two. So you can't really prepare.
So do you grieve or do you celebrate? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. It's like a nightmare. You kind of wish that you were going to wake up from it would be all different, but all beyond our control. Hello.
How are you?
Good.
You're
And
right?
you?
Yeah, I'm all right. Come along. You met Hillary before?
No.
She's one of our midwives.
Hi, Kezia, Chris.
Anything to report? And movements-wise?
Definitely twin one, lots and lots.
Right. Well, let's have a look. So that's the bigger baby there. So this baby is growing well and is a normal size baby. So the other baby is here down. Sorry, guys.
You're right, sorry.
I'm very sorry. I'll leave. What I normally do. I'm sorry. We just will leave you alone, okay, Kezia? And I'll come back later. Just have a few moments, okay? And I'll come back later.
Oh my goodness. Okay. It's not a surprise that, they've said this the whole time, but flippin' heck.
So, child of mine, I don't know, how many of you have seen the whole film? Many of you seen the whole film? A few. I mean, Child of Mine, for those of you who haven't, is a film that follows a series of couples. How many? I mean, about half a dozen?
3 couples.
Sorry?
3 couples.
3 couples,
Yeah.
okay. So it's 3 couples, and they're all, each impacted by the tragedy of stillbirth in different ways and kind of at different, in their lives. Incredibly powerful film. I mean, I suppose the obvious question that arises from that clip is, again, it's a little bit like the conversation we had about the first clip, often, is that in order to make this film, the whole power of the film is that these couples have let you into their lives and that you're able to kind of follow them. And yet, what's happening to them is, at times, at least, so terrible and so intimate and so private that borderline. And it struck me watching that clip that, there's a moment where the doctors say, "Shall we leave you alone?"
Yeah.
And they do. But of course, the camera doesn't leave them alone. I mean, so I wonder if you could just, again, if you could just talk a bit about that, about trying, how you, I suppose partly how you square that, as a filmmaker, and also about kind of what what your judgment calls are, and whether to the extent to which you kind of know what you're going to do before you go into the room, and how much of it is actually about reacting to what's happening.
So, I mean, all our films are based on really strong relationships with the contributors. So from the very beginning, we say, if ever you want us to stop, we stop. It's a collaboration. We're making this together. It's not our journey, it's not our story, it's theirs. And they've wanted to be involved for whatever reason. So they have a call, and when they want us to leave and go away, and we were always very transparent about that. So at that point, I mean, we do actually say, shall we go? Obviously, it's not in the film. But Chris was like, no, it's fine. Afterwards, we discussed, and we carried on filming, which was obviously very difficult and uncomfortable. But afterwards, we discussed and said, do you still want us to use that footage? And I think Chris and Kezia, I mean, we filmed the birth, actually, as well, later on, of both the twins, and I think they felt that they were involved in a film kind of highlighting and raising awareness about stillbirth, and they wanted to show the kind of stark reality of that, and that is sometimes showing really uncomfortable scenes, but they're incredibly brave in doing so, and I think the impact...
Do you show, I mean, what do you have a kind of, I don't know, is there a sort of True Vision sort of policy, or do you kind of have, I mean, in terms of well, I mean, all of your films, a film like that, do you show the contributors a cut?
Yeah.
And kind of what is the sort of, because there's, I mean, as we know, there are lots of kind of issues around editorial control and the extent to which you can or can't give editorial control to people in the film.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, both of you really, but I'm interested, just talk us through how you think that, how that works.
As Katie says, we see these as collaborations between us and the contributors, and so we always show our contributors the films if we can. Occasionally, so there's a film going out tonight that we'll hopefully see a clip of in a bit with Stacey Dooley about homelessness. One of the contributors on that has just not wanted to see it. You know, Katie's been endlessly trying to get him to see it, and he just doesn't. You know, he's just not engaging. So, but we will try to show them the film, and they know that they don't have editorial control. Having said that, it's normally, so there's the, the formal words are fairness and accuracy. So is it fair and is it accurate? But really, it's about you, particularly with vulnerable contributors and with Kezia and Chris and the other couples. It's about here's how we're telling your story. And generally, I think pretty much, I mean, all three couples loved it, didn't they?
Yeah.
They were all incredibly pleased with the way it told their story. They felt it was very sympathetic, and that's generally our experience because that's the kind of film we aim to make.
And if anything, we actually offered not to include parts, and they said, no, we want you to keep that in.
Yeah, and also, I mean, you frame the film as well, don't you? With I mean, there's quite a lot of interviews from kind of doctors and health professionals. So the film is framed with a conversation about the importance of. I mean, part of the film is also about the importance of being able to talk about this issue and to try and make it less of a taboo. Can I just? I mean, the other thing, Katie, is that it's a not quite feature-length, but it's a long film. Kind of 90-minute sort of slot. And it's, well, actually, no, I want to ask another question quickly first. So in terms of your casting, I mean, you've got three stories there that all pan out, kind of, remarkably, but you are, I mean, a bit like Catching a Killer, you're filming in real time. So you can't know how these stories are going to end. You can't know if they're going to have a happy ending or a tragic ending or kind of maybe even, well, they're going to have an ending, obviously, but exactly how they're going to pan out and how they're going to relate to one another. So, I mean, did you start with more than three couples and some of them never made the final film? I mean, how did that work?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, because of the nature of their journeys, we always film with more people than end up in the final film, and we're always very clear with the couples that that's the case from the beginning. So there were 4 couples that we filmed with who weren't in the final film. Right. And then we offered to do something with their film, whether that's for the hospital or educational or, short for Guardian, if we can do that, so that they don't feel like they've just been dropped and neglected. But we're very clear from the beginning that is a possibility,
And in terms of, crafting something at that length, I mean, did you find it, did you find it difficult, kind of working at a longer length, or, I mean, how did it,
So it was actually commissioned for 60 minutes.
Right.
And then things happened throughout the film that obviously weren't expected, that were incredibly powerful. So the cut that we showed Brian was longer, and we said, we know we need to cut it by 15 minutes. And he said, I don't think we do. I think we try and push. And then it was extended to a 90 minutes. So we were trying to make it a 60, but we couldn't.
Right.
So it was actually, the other way round.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those cases where I saw Casey's first cut, and at the end of it was just sort of jumping up and down on my chair and going, "This is extraordinary."
Don't we love when that happens?
We're absolutely not trying to get this down to 60.
Yeah.
You know, we're going to show it to the channel at 90. We showed it to the channel at 90, and Dorothy Byrne, who's the commissioning editor, didn't question for a second that it should be 90. She just immediately
I'm going to move us on. We've got one more clip. Now, this is, as Brian, I think, hinted earlier, this is a bit of a sneak preview. This is a trailer for a film that is going out tonight.
Yep, BBC One, 10:45.
BBC One, you might get it. Set your. Well, we used to call them video recorders. I don't know what they call them these days, but anyway.
No, tweet about it. Just tweet about it.
Yeah,
tweet to all your friends.
These days, these films are around forever, so you can watch them on. You'll be watching them on Netflix for the next 20 years. So this is, and I think what's interesting is, so this is a film with Stacey Dooley as presenter. So again, another interesting example of working in a different. Because again, I think probably this sort of the received vision of True Vision, if you know, is your films are very much about the classic observational documentary where there is nothing between the camera and the subject, and here we have the intermediary that is Stacey Dooley. Shall we watch the clip and then we can talk briefly about it?
All right.
That's me for the night then.
Here we go. How many nights do you reckon you've done out here?
Probably about 11, 12 nights out here.
Really?
Yeah. They're usually work nights that I'm out here, so.
I feel like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place because you're working to try and better yourself, but in order to work, you've got to sacrifice your bed.
It's a nightmare, isn't it? Give up a bed to work.
It feels much quieter than it did even an hour ago.
About an hour or two, you usually get people walk up to you and asking who you are and stuff like this. And it's usually homeless as well, just to see how vulnerable you are, really. You've just basically got to be like your little landowner, do you know what I mean? You've got to move them on.
Have you ever had to fight?
No.
That's good.
Touch wood, I've not. But it has nearly got to that point, but you've got to just, you know what I mean, keep cool with it, just move them on. It's shit. Moved to Blackpool to get a better life, and here I am being homeless. It is a really shitty situation, but it is what it is, and it's just a part that I've got to get over.
And because you're not from here, you're not a priority necessarily, is that right? Tell me how
Blackpool
it works.
connections. I've not got a local connection with Blackpool. You've got to be here like 3 out of 5 years. So you've got to have been here 5 years, but you can move away for them 2 years and be here 3 out of 5 years.
Right.
I don't know how it works and how it makes sense, but yeah, I'm lower priority of it. So because I'm working as well, I'm even worse of it. Do you know what I mean?
And you're 18.
Yeah.
When you were 17, you had that safety net.
Yeah. I'd have been 100% priority, but that's not the case. It's just a bad chapter in my life, do you know what I mean?
Of course it is. It's circumstantial. You've not done anything to warrant or deserve this.
No, I'm just hoping it all is something to put behind me soon.
Mm.
I'm sort of hoping that next month I can celebrate my birthday not being homeless, because I'm 19 next month, so...
What date?
17th.
Of July?
Yeah.
Okay.
So hopefully I won't be homeless next month. I'm hoping so anyway.
Touch wood.
I know, yeah, that'd be the shittiest thing to think of.
Everything crossed. You know, being told by Josh that he slept out on the streets over 10 times, what can you even say to him? How could anybody justify that or be okay with that? It's utter madness. It's completely insane. That we're now in a situation where organisations who have only got 8 beds are having to come out to him, hand him a sleeping bag over, it's better than nothing, and wishing him the best of luck. And that's him. Sort yourself out, look after yourself. Good luck, someone's going to try and rob you. It's shitty, it's awful.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I should say I'm a big fan of Stacey. I've always thought she was great. But it is interesting from a filmmaker's point of view that it's a very different dynamic when you have a presenter in there. I mean, it seems, just could you talk, I mean, it seems to me there are upsides to that, there are gains you might get, but there's also maybe things that you lose as well. I mean, can you talk a little bit about sort of the kind of working with a presenter as opposed to the direct relationship you have with the subject?
So Stacey's an absolute delight to work with. For this, we had kind of 14 days with her over about 6 months, and we couldn't predict when the days would be because she's so busy, which was quite difficult because you can't write life. So it totally was kind of luck and chance whether something was happening that we could film with her for. So actually with this, we've got a combination of Stacey with the contributors, but also kind of interviews without her as well. So it's a bit of a hybrid of observational and presenter, because it had to be.
And is there a sense, I mean, I don't want to sound like the cynic here, but I mean, is this partly about changing tastes and expectations among commissioners or among audiences?
I think it's, this
easier
was
to get a film like this commissioned with someone like
this was pitched to BBC One as an obdoc this time last year. And it was actually the controller of BBC One, Charlotte Moore, who came back to me and said, would you consider doing it with Stacey? And we've done a few films with Stacey and knew how delightful she is to work with. The fact is that having Stacey on board, made it much more palatable to BBC One. They could go, okay, this will get an audience because it's got Stacey. It's not one of those hard, difficult films that ought to be on BBC 4 or BBC 2. But also, from our point of view, it actually makes it easier to make because you've got someone on screen. You're not constantly trying to find stuff happening, and you're not constantly trying to find. With homelessness, not a lot happens, and therefore the sort of events of the film are harder to mine. Whereas with Stacey comes in and she talks to people, and she talks brilliantly to people, and people really like her and open up to her. And so actually it makes it an easier film to make, notwithstanding the fact that you can hardly ever get her because of her schedule. But apart from that, if we'd been able to get her when we wanted her, then it would have been a much easier film to
also,
make.
presumably, again, it brings us full circle to the Orphans film that we started with, that, in the end, as you say, True Vision is there to make films that make a difference. And one of the ways you make a difference is by reaching an audience, and so there are those kind of, so just as the Orphans film moves from BBC 4 to BBC 2, and then Elton sees it, and Richard Cotter sees it, and suddenly, and in a way, that is, I imagine, that's a big part of why you're doing this.
I mean, the thing is, you and I both go to festivals a lot, and we see some really interesting films in festivals, which 10,000 people will probably see in the life of the film, because they haven't been made for a broadcaster, they've been made for this festival circuit, which is, great experience for the filmmakers and fantastic, but they're not going to actually have an impact in the world, those films, very, very, very rarely, unless a broadcaster picks them up and shows them. The beauty of a film like this is that, Stacey's connection to it means it reaches a much larger audience than it would on its own.
Okay, can we put the lights up? We've got a little bit of time for questions, I think. Okay, so again, the drill. I'll pick you out and then wait for the mic. We have a question right here. If you put your hand up, then I'll look out for you. But keep them nice and short, and we can get more in.
Okay. Hi. I really like what True Vision is doing. I think your films are very, very powerful. I'm also a documentary maker, and I agree with you. I think I don't want my films just to be shown at the festival and not seen. So as an emergent filmmaker, except for bloody-minded perseverance, which I have lots of that, I can assure you, what other tips or techniques can I do to get commissioners to listen to my ideas, or for any of the ideas of the people here? What do you suggest as a way to get them to listen? I think.
So, tasters are great. Shooting tasters, everybody can shoot a taster these days. It's really, you can shoot it on your phone. It doesn't have to be shot on a £20,000 camera. You can literally shoot it on your phone, because what they're interested in is the character and the person and the story you've got. So shoot a taster. You can cut it on any computer. You can cut together 2-3 minutes of stuff. Don't send people 20-page ideas, because they'll mean to read them and they won't quite get round to it. Short ideas, because that's what they'll be judged for. That's how they'll be pitching it on to the controllers in due course. it's often worth working with a production company like True Vision, like Raw, like Blast, like Century. There are lots of great production companies out there who already have the access. They're already having the conversations with the commissioners, and they also know what the commissioners are interested in. Really important to be aware of what the broadcasters have already done, because the one thing that pisses a commissioner off is someone saying, "Oh, I've got this great idea for a film," and they go, "Yeah, that's a film we made last year. You know, almost the same thing." They're not going to repeat themselves, and it's just going to annoy them when you're pitching something similar. That's a few quick tips.
Thank you. You get anything to add?
Not particularly. I mean, I suppose I was in quite a rare situation that I have mainly been staff at one company, and I'm really aware that the majority of the documentary world is freelance. I've been incredibly lucky in that respect, that I've been, working very closely already with an established production company.
Does he get you to go out pitching?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, there's a question at the back, I think, there. With and anybody else, just stick your hand up and I will come to you. Thank you.
So just in general, so how do you come up with the inspiration for your ideas and the documentaries that you do, and then how do you follow up? How do you go out there and get the contacts that you're going to interview and stuff like that?
Inspiration comes from anywhere. I mean, people come to us with ideas a lot. Sometimes the broadcasters come to us with an idea. Katie's next film is actually something that a Channel 4 commissioner suggested we look at, and we went, "Oh yeah, this is really interesting," and that sometimes happens. Filmmakers come to us with ideas. I'll read something in a paper, or I can't say where it comes from. It's all sorts of places. It's then recognizing which ones have got legs, which ones have particularly got, I mean, I can't tell you how many people have come to me in the last 6 months saying, "I want to make a film about knife crime." And you go, "Yeah, well,
join the club."
Fine. There's lots of people who want to make film. What's your film about knife crime? "Oh, but it'll be really interesting, and we'll talk about knife crime, and it'll be really interesting." What's the idea? Who are the characters? What's going to happen? What are we going to point the film at? What are we going to point the camera at where stuff's going to happen in an interesting way that hasn't been seen before, that isn't a repetition of the 20 other films that have been made about knife crime? So it's about, the inspiration is partly from wherever, and then the trick is to decide which of those you're going to follow up, because there's always more ideas and there's time to follow up, and then following them up in terms of trying to find character and narrative. Always down to character and narrative.
Okay, good. I agree with that, by the way. Now, we had a question there, and then I think unless you were scratching your head, I think so let's have this question, and then we'll come to you.
Hi, I'm Hannah. As a company, True Vision have made quite a variety of films about different topics and issues. Do you think it matters as documentary makers whether you focus on a broad variety of issues, or whether you should kind of niche down and make documentaries just about homelessness or mental health, or if there's any benefits to you?
I think that when I was a director, before I started True Vision, when I was a sort of jobbing director, someone said to me, "Oh, suggested I'd done one thing, and they suggested I should do another very similar thing." And I said, "Oh, I don't want to get pigeonholed." And I was about 25 at the time. And this guy kind of sighed and said, "Worry about being pigeonholed when you're 50. Right now, you want to get the next job, and pigeonholing is really good because it means you get more work doing that thing." I think that so there is a usefulness about being focused. It's interesting that you say we're sort of quite broad. I think that most people in the industry would disagree with that and would see True Vision as being really quite focused on human rights and social issues. Most companies are actually much broader than that, and I think we're pretty. Our reputation is for being quite focused, and I think that's. I would like to.
I spent 5 years working on films about poverty, so talk about pigeonholed.
Yeah. Okay, we have one more question, and then we're going to have to wind it up, I'm afraid. So.
Okay. Just wanted to know roughly, how do you secure your product, with regards to sending it to people, ideas? I've heard a lot of stories where people have had their product taken away from them. How do you keep it safe?
You can't. I mean, you can't copyright an idea, and I think the fact is that if you've got a good idea, It's rare, actually, that the idea per se is particularly good. It's 99 times out of 100, it's actually the characters and the access that's good. So most of the things we're pitching, it's about access and it's about character and it's about our track record reassuring the commissioners that we will be able to secure that access even if we haven't got it. So I think that, to be honest, people send me stuff and they go, it's copyright all over it and that kind of thing. And the fact is, it's not actually, there's nothing there to copyright because they're saying we want to make a film about knife crime and I'm copywriting this idea of a film about knife crime. Well, you can't copyright an idea about knife crime. What you can do is you can say, I've got access to this particular person who's this inspirational guy who works with kids and does this amazing work and transforms them and has taught people out of gangs. And I know him and he wants to make a film with me. Then you've kind of if then it turns up on another channel and he's actually we had a film that we were pitching to the BBC about postnatal psychosis, which the BBC said no to, and then and we had access to a particular unit, and then 18 months later it turned up on BBC One. And I was kind of a bit pissed off because I'd pitched exactly that idea and exactly that access. But then the guy who ran the unit, we hadn't been able to get it away, so he'd gone to another production company, and they had, their timing was better. They happened to pitch it at a time when that storyline was coming up on EastEnders, and so BBC One controller went, yeah, we'll do it now. That's life.
Okay. Thank you very much. Before you go, can I just ask you to put your hands together for Brian and Katie? Thank you very much.